In the summer of 1944, a farm boy from Tennessee ran out of bazooka rounds with a German tank 40 yards away. What he reached for next was not in any Army manual. Across 3 wars, American soldiers learned the same brutal lesson. When the standard issue weapon jammed, ran dry, or simply wasn't built for the job in front of them, you improvised or you didn't make it home. Number 7 on this list was so effective the Army quietly copied it. And number 1 turned a single Marine into a legend the enemy put a bounty on. These 25 field expedients were born in mud, fear, and boredom, then forgotten the moment the shooting stopped. Before we start, hit that subscribe button. Let's count down the 25 weapons GIs built when the system failed them. Let's begin with number 25. Number 25, the sharpened entrenching tool. Every rifleman carried a folding shovel to dig his foxhole, and by the second week in the line, most of them had run a file along one edge until it bit like a hatchet. In the close, screaming chaos of a night trench raid, a rifle was too long and a bayonet too slow to bring around. The little spade was perfect. It swung fast, it hooked, it chopped. Veterans of the Hurtgen Forest spoke plainly about it in later years, describing hand-to-hand fighting in fog so thick a man could not see the enemy until they were already inside the hole. The shovel that dug your shelter at dusk became the thing that kept you in it at dawn. It cost the Army pennies and asked nothing but a whetstone. No weapon on this list was more humble or more honest about what war actually was. Number 24, the file-forged fighting knife. Factory-issue knives arrived slowly and often not at all, so men in machine shops and repair depots made their own. They took worn-out files, ground off the teeth, shaped a point, and wrapped the tang in leather cord or the melted grip of an old toothbrush handle. The steel in a good file was harder than anything the quartermaster handed out, and it held an edge through weeks of prying open ration cans, cutting parachute cord, and worse. Sailors and airmen traded them like currency. Each one was slightly different, marked by the hand that made it, and men grew attached to a blade the way they grew attached to a lucky coin. When a soldier's rifle failed him in the dark, this was the last argument he had left, and it never jammed, never ran dry, and never needed a supply line. Number 23, the knuckle duster trench knife. Borrowed from the mud of the First World War and dragged back out for the Second, this was a blade fused to a brass grip cast into a set of knuckles. The Army issued a version of it, then quietly stopped, deciding it was awkward on the belt and too specialized for open battle. But the men who fought in cellars, ruined towns, and boarding actions knew better. In a doorway or a stairwell, there was no room to shoulder a rifle, and this single ugly tool let a man punch and cut in the same motion. Paratroopers landing scattered behind enemy lines, cut off from their units and often from their weapons, prized it above almost anything. It was brutal, close, and personal. A weapon for the moments no training film ever showed. It vanished from the supply chain, but never from the men who needed it. Number 22, the rifle as a club. It sounds like defeat, and often it was, but a rifle out of ammunition was still 8 pounds of walnut and steel. When the M1 Garand fired its last round, the empty clip ejected with a bright metallic ping, a sound so distinctive that soldiers swore the enemy learned to listen for it. In that heartbeat before a man could reload, plenty of GIs simply reversed the rifle and swung the buttstock like an axe handle. Marines on the Pacific Islands, overrun in banzai charges where the fighting collapsed into a single seething mass, used their rifles as bludgeons because there was no time for anything else. The Springfield and the Garand were built like fence posts and took the abuse. It was the oldest improvisation of all, older than gunpowder, and it returned the instant the modern weapon fell silent. Number 21. The bayonet pike. On the Pacific Islands, night attacks came in waves, and a man's bayonet was only as long as his rifle. So some defenders lashed bayonets or knives to bamboo poles and boat hooks, building crude spears that let them keep a screaming attacker at arm's length in the pitch black. It was medieval, and everyone knew it, but medieval worked when the fighting pressed in close enough that reloading became impossible. Engineers and beachmasters, men who were not frontline riflemen and often carried little more than a pistol, improvised these to hold a perimeter until dawn. There is something haunting about it. Industrial armies with aircraft carriers and radar reduced to sharpened sticks in the dark. But the pole gave a frightened man reach, and reach in those moments was the difference between morning and nothing. Number 20. The sock sap. Every soldier had socks, and every camp had sand or gravel, and that was all it took to make a silent, deniable weapon. Filled and knotted, a sock became a blackjack, heavy and soft-faced, useful for sentries who needed a man down without a sound. Military police and men on rear area security details carried them because a gunshot brought 100 questions and a swung sock brought none. It left no casing, no report, no muzzle flash to give away a position. Reconnaissance patrols slipping through enemy lines to grab a prisoner needed exactly this kind of quiet. It was the weapon of men who could not afford noise, and it disappeared from memory precisely because it was never meant to be remembered. No manual listed it, no armorer issued it. It simply existed wherever a soldier had a spare sock and a reason. Number 19. The Molotov cocktail. When anti-tank rounds ran out and the armor kept coming, GIs reached for the crudest answer in warfare, a bottle of gasoline with a burning rag. American troops picked it up, watching the Finns and the Soviets trade the technique back and forth. And by the fighting in Italy and France, it was a known field expedient. It did little against thick frontal armor, but a tank buttoned up in a narrow street, its engine deck exposed, was vulnerable to fire that could pour through the grills and choke the crew out. Men learned to aim for the back, to wait until the machine passed, to strike where the steel was thin. It was terrifying to use, requiring a soldier to let a tank get close, and it burned as many nerves as it did engines. But when the bazooka was empty, it was often all there was. Number 18. The gammon grenade. American paratroopers dropping into Normandy carried a British invention that was really a blank check for improvisation, a cloth bag with a fuse that a man could pack with as much or as little explosive as the target demanded. A small charge cleared a machine gun nest. A fat one, weighted with scrap metal, could crack the tracks of a light vehicle. Because the soldier decided how much to load, the same weapon handled a dozen different problems, and men scattered miles from their drop zones, cut off and improvising their whole war, loved it for exactly that flexibility. It was messy and unstable and utterly of its moment, a weapon defined not by a factory, but by the judgment of a frightened 19-year-old in a hedgerow. When it worked, it turned one man into a demolition team. Number 17. The improvised sticky bomb. The idea was simple and desperate. Get an explosive charge to cling to a tank long enough to matter. GIs studied the British sticky bomb, coated in adhesive so it would hold to armor plate, and cobbled together their own versions when the official supply fell short. The catch was murderous. To use it, a man had to get close enough to press or hurl the charge against the hull, then get clear before it went. Grease and mud on a tank's surface often defeated the whole thing, sending the charge sliding harmlessly off. It was a weapon that demanded a man walk up to the deadliest machine on the battlefield with something the size of a grapefruit in his hand. Few improvisations asked more courage for less certainty. But against a breakthrough, when the line was about to fold, courage was the only ammunition left. Number 16. The pole charge. On Iwo Jima and Okinawa, the Japanese fought from concrete bunkers and cave mouths that shrugged off rifle fire and even artillery. Standard grenades bounced off the openings or fell short. So Marines wired explosives to the end of long wooden poles, then crawled forward under covering fire to jam the charge directly into a firing slit before it blew. It was among the most dangerous jobs in the entire Pacific, requiring a man to cross open ground straight toward a machine gun, then stand at the very mouth of it. Whole assault teams were built around the technique, one man on the pole, others suppressing the slit so he could live long enough to reach it. The casualty rate was appalling, but bunker by bunker, hill by hill, the pole charge cracked defenses that nothing issued from a depot could touch. Number 15. The field-assembled Bangalore torpedo. Barbed wire and mines turned a beach or a hedgerow into a killing floor, and a man crawling forward with wire cutters rarely lived long. The Bangalore torpedo answered that, a set of explosive-filled pipe sections that screwed together into one long tube, shoved ahead of the soldier and detonated to blow a clear path through wire and clear a lane through mines. Engineers assembled them on the spot, adding sections until the tube reached the obstacle, all while under fire. Anyone who has seen the Normandy landings dramatized has seen it. The frantic work at the base of the seawall, the shouted call to clear before the blast. It was old technology dating back decades, but it remained the fastest way through a wire entanglement that infantry had. When the assault stalled at the wire, the Bangalore was the key that turned. Number 14. The sea ration can alarm. Perimeter defense at night was a war of nerves, and a sentry could not stare into darkness forever without missing the one shadow that mattered. So GIs turned their garbage into an early warning system. An empty ration can, hung on the wire with a few pebbles inside, rattled the instant a man or a wire-tripped device disturbed it. Some rigged them to trip flares or to grenades, turning the humble tin into the trigger for a nastier surprise. In the jungle fighting of later wars, where an enemy specialized in silent night infiltration, these rattling cans bought the seconds that saved a position. It cost nothing, since the cans were already there, emptied at supper. The men who slept behind that thin line of tin never thought of it as a weapon, but it killed as surely as anything by refusing to let the enemy arrive unannounced. Number 13. The captured Panzerfaust. American anti-tank weapons were often outmatched by German armor, and every GI knew it. The German Panzerfaust, by contrast, was a cheap, powerful, single-use tube that could punch through the thickest plate, and the Germans left them scattered across every battlefield they retreated from. So GIs picked them up and turned them around. Soldiers taught each other the markings, the simple sighting, and the safe way to fire a weapon printed with instructions none of them could read. In the street fighting of late 1944 and 1945, American units cleared buildings and stopped counterattacks with enemy weapons pulled from the rubble. There was a grim justice in it, the very tool built to destroy them repurposed by the men it was meant to kill. It faded from the record because armies do not like to admit borrowing from the enemy. But borrow they did, gratefully. Number 12. The captured MG-42. The German MG-42 machine gun fired so fast its report blurred into a single ripping sound, earning it names like the buzzsaw and the bone saw from the men on the receiving end. It was simply better in some ways than what the GIs carried, lighter to move and devastating in defense. So when a position was overrun and a working MG-42 was left behind, American soldiers claimed it. The problem was the sound. That unmistakable ripping tear told everyone, friend and foe, that a German gun was firing and more than one GI was nearly shot by his own side for using a captured one. Units worked out signals and warnings, so the man behind the buzzsaw survived his own cleverness. It was a weapon so good that Americans risked friendly fire to use it. And after the war, its design influenced the guns the Army built next. Number 11. The White Phosphorus Bunker Buster. Willie Pete, the men called it. A shell or grenade filled with white phosphorus that burned fierce and white and threw up a wall of blinding smoke. It was issued as a screening and marking tool, but soldiers learned it did something else. It drove men out of holes that high explosive could not reach. Against fortified positions and cave complexes, its burning cloud filled every crevice and forced defenders into the open, where riflemen waited. It was feared and hated in equal measure by anyone near it. Marines and infantry used it to break strong points that had pinned them for hours. There is no gentle way to describe what it did, which is exactly why the men who relied on it spoke of it quietly. But when a bunker would not fall to anything else, Willie Pete cleared it, one white cloud at a time. Number 10. The Flame Fougasse. Defenders expecting an armored attack on a fixed line reached back into military history for one of its oldest tricks. The buried barrel of thickened fuel angled at the road, wired to hurl a sheet of flame across anything that passed. GIs holding a choke point would dig these drums into the shoulder of a road or the mouth of a valley, then wait. When a column entered the killing zone, the charge threw burning fuel across the whole width of the pass, an ambush of fire no crew wanted to drive into. It was static, one use, and utterly terrifying to face. Engineers laid them along expected avenues of approach, the way earlier armies dug pit traps. Modern anti-tank weapons eventually made the buried flame barrel obsolete, and it slipped out of the manuals. But for the men holding a thin line against armor, a wall of fire bought time nothing else could. Number 9. The Napalm Belly Tank. Fighter pilots carried disposable fuel tanks slung under their wings to extend their range, dropping them empty once the fuel was gone. Somewhere over the fighting, ground crews and pilots realized those tanks could carry something other than gasoline. Filled with thickened, jellied fuel, the humble drop tank became a firebomb, released over troop concentrations and dug in positions to spread flame across a wide area. It was crude, unguided, and improvised entirely from parts meant to be thrown away. In Korea especially, when close air support was the difference between a held line and a broken one, the converted belly tank filled a gap in the arsenal. Whole squadrons adapted the trick. The weapon that started as an empty aluminum shell, designed only to be discarded, became one of the most feared tools in the sky, a factory of fire built from garbage. Number 8. The Daisy Chained Mine. A single mine stopped a single vehicle or man. But GIs learned to wire several together, so one command detonated them all at once, sweeping a road or a field with a single pull. Laid in a line and linked, this daisy chain turned a scattering of individual charges into a coordinated blast that could catch an entire patrol or a column bunched on a trail. Defenders covering a wide front with too few men used it to make a handful of mines do the work of many, triggering the whole string the instant the enemy stepped into the zone. It demanded patience to lay and nerve to trigger at exactly the right moment. This linking of charges into one controlled event pointed straight toward the directional weapons that came later. The men who rigged them were doing engineering in the dark, turning arithmetic into ambush. Number 7. The Hillbilly Armored Sherman. American tank crews knew their Shermans were underprotected against German guns, and they were not willing to die waiting for the factories to fix it. So they armored their own tanks with whatever they could find. Sandbags stacked across the front, spare track links welded over the hull, concrete poured into wooden forms, sheet steel scavenged from wrecks and knocked out vehicles. Commanders argued about whether it even helped, and some believed it strained the engines more than it stopped shells. But the crews inside did it anyway, because a chance was better than none, and because doing something felt better than trusting a design that got men killed. The tradition never died. Decades later, in a different war, soldiers welding scrap plate onto their trucks would coin the phrase hillbilly armor for exactly the same desperate arithmetic. The crew improvising the protection the system failed to provide. Number 6. The trench shotgun revival. Somewhere in the wars after the First World War, the Army half forgot how devastating a shotgun was in close quarters, and the men doing the close quarters fighting had to remind them. The old pump-action trench guns, fitted with heat shields and bayonet lugs, came back out for jungle and island fighting, where engagements happened at a few yards in dense cover. A rifle was built to reach across a field, but in a wall of green where the enemy appeared at arm's length, a shotgun's spreading pattern was the answer. Point men on patrol, walking into ambushes before anyone else, carried them by preference. It was not truly improvised so much as rediscovered, dragged back into service by soldiers who trusted it over the standard rifle for the killing distance they actually fought at. Sometimes the best field expedient is remembering what your grandfather already knew. Number 5. The duckbill shotgun spreader. The trouble with a combat shotgun in the jungle was that its pattern stayed round, spreading evenly in a circle when what a man on a narrow trail wanted was width. So armorers fitted a device to the muzzle that squeezed the shot into a horizontal spread, wider than it was tall, sweeping across a path instead of a tidy circle. They called it the duckbill for its flattened shape. It let a single blast rake a broader arc of trail, catching more of an ambushing enemy strung out along a path. It was a small, clever fix to a specific problem, born from men who used the weapon every day and knew exactly how it was failing them. The device had its flaws and never became standard, but its logic was pure field wisdom, reshaping the weapon to match the shape of the fight. Number 4. The improvised directional mine. Before the famous factory-made directional mine existed, soldiers were already trying to solve the same problem: how to focus an explosion outward toward the enemy instead of wasting it in every direction. They packed charges behind scrap metal and rigged them to throw that metal forward in a lethal spray, aimed down a trail or across a clearing where an ambush was expected. It was dangerous, imprecise work, and the men who built these improvised versions were essentially inventing on the battlefield what engineers would later refine into a standardized weapon. The lineage runs straight from a soldier crouched in the dark, wiring a charge behind a plate of scavenged steel to one of the most widely used defensive weapons of the modern age. The idea did not come from a laboratory. It came from men who needed it and could not wait for the official version to arrive. Number 3. The Culin hedgerow cutter. After Normandy, the American advance ground to a complete halt in the bocage, ancient fields walled by thick earthen hedgerows that stopped tanks cold. A Sherman trying to climb one exposed its thin belly to German guns, and the breakout was strangling in the hedges. Then a sergeant named Curtis Culin welded a set of steel prongs to the front of a tank, cut from the very German beach obstacles that had littered the landing zones. The prongs let the tank punch straight through the hedgerow instead of climbing over it, keeping its armor forward and its belly hidden. Word raced up the chain, and within weeks hundreds of tanks wore the device, cut from scrap by field welders working around the clock. Eisenhower himself praised the fix. One sergeant's idea, built from the enemy's own steel, helped crack open the entire Normandy front. Number 2. The scoped field sniper rifle. Standard issue sniper rifles were scarce and often arrived late, so units that needed precision built it themselves. Armorers mounted commercial or salvaged telescopic sights onto ordinary service rifles, hand-fitting brackets and zeroing the optics on makeshift ranges behind the line. The result was a sniper's weapon assembled from a standard rifle and a hunting scope, and in skilled hands it reached out and touched targets the rest of the platoon could not even see. Marksmen who had grown up hunting brought civilian knowledge into a military problem, understanding wind and drop in ways no basic training had time to teach. These field-built rifles held key crossings, silenced enemy machine gun crews, and made a single patient man worth a squad. The official sniper program eventually caught up, but in the meantime, the deadliest riflemen in the theater often carried weapons they had helped build with their own hands. Number 1. Carlos Hathcock's 50 caliber sniper rifle. The heavy 50 caliber machine gun was built to shred aircraft and vehicles, not to make precision shots. But a Marine sniper named Carlos Hathcock looked at that enormous cartridge, capable of carrying far beyond any normal rifle, and saw something no manual described. He mounted a telescopic sight to a single 50 caliber machine gun and fired it one deliberate round at a time, turning an area weapon into the longest-reaching sniper rifle in the war. With it, he made a shot at a distance that stood as a record for decades, striking a target most rifles could not have carried a bullet to. The enemy came to fear him so deeply, they placed a bounty on his life. His improvisation did not fade into history, it changed it. Today, the anti-materiel sniper rifle is a standard tool in every serious army, and it traces straight back to one Marine, one machine gun, and one scope, deciding that the weapon he had could do far more than it was ever meant to. From a sharpened shovel to a scoped machine gun, these 25 weapons share one thread. Every single one was born the moment a soldier looked at the tools he was handed, found them not enough, and refused to accept it. The system failed, and the men in the mud filled the gap with courage, scrap, and stubborn cleverness. They were never supposed to have to, but when they did, they proved that the deadliest thing on any battlefield was never the standard issue weapon. It was the human being who could improvise a better one. Which of these surprised you most? Tell me in the comments, and if this made you see these forgotten soldiers a little differently, you know what to do.